What comes to mind when you hear heart-wrenching stories of serial killers who showed no regret or remorse even at the point of execution? Today, we will uncover these individuals, their last meals, and their final words before facing the ultimate consequence for their actions.
An Iowa meth kingpin convicted of killing 5 people was executed today in Indiana.
Dustin Lee Honken. State, Indiana. Date of execution, January 17, 2020. Dustin Lee Honken and Angela Jane Johnson are American mass murderers convicted of the 1993 murders of 5 people in Cerro Gordo County, Iowa. Honken was sentenced to death and executed by the federal government on July 17, 2020. His final words were a reciting of the poem Heaven, Heaven by Gerard Manley Hopkins. I have desired to go where springs not fail, to fields where flies no sharp and sided hail, and a few lilies blow. And I have asked to be where no storms come, where the green swell is in the havens dumb, and out of the swing of the sea. Honken said, Hail Mary, Mother of God, pray for me. He was pronounced dead at 3:36 p.m. CST. Nicholas Todd Sutton. State, North Carolina. Date of execution, February 20, 2020. Nicholas Todd Sutton was an American serial killer who was responsible for murdering 2 acquaintances and his grandmother in North Carolina and Tennessee from August to December 1979. Convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for these crimes, Sutton, among 3 others, later participated in a 1985 prison killing over substances. For this final crime, he was sentenced to death and executed in 2020 by electric chair. In his final statement, Sutton spoke about his faith, love, and gratefulness to his family, friends, and Jesus Christ. After having his spiritual advisor serve communion, consisting of Welch's grape juice and a wafer, Sutton ate his requested last meal of fried pork chops, mashed potatoes with gravy, and peach pie with vanilla ice cream. His last words were, I'm just grateful to be a servant of God. Bobby Joe Long. State, Florida. Date of execution, May 23, 2019. Bobby Joe Long was an American serial killer and rapist who was executed by the state of Florida for the murder of Michelle Denise Sims. Long abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered at least 10 women in the Tampa Bay area in Florida during 8 months in 1984. Long was sentenced to death for 1 of the murders and life for 7 others. He was executed by lethal injection on May 23, 2019. He requested roast beef, bacon, French fries, and soda for his last meal, but made no last words. Dominique Hakeem Marcel Ray. State, Alabama. Date of execution, February 7, 2019. Dominique Hakeem Marcel Ray was on Alabama death row for the sexual assault and murder of a 15-year-old girl and had been given a life sentence for the murders of 2 brothers. He was scheduled for execution on February 7, 2019, and argued he had the right to have a Muslim imam present in the execution chamber instead of the Christian chaplain mandated by Alabama's execution protocol. Ray received a stay from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals the day before his execution, but Alabama moved for the Supreme Court to vacate the stay of execution. The Supreme Court vacated the stay, and Ray was executed on his scheduled date. He had no final words or meal. Gary Ray Bowles. State, Florida. Date of execution, August 22, 2019. Gary Ray Bowles was an American serial killer who was executed in 2019 for the murders of 6 men in 1994. He is sometimes called the 1 to 95 killer, since most of his victims lived close to the Interstate 95 highway. Bowles was executed by lethal injection on August 22, 2019, at Florida State Prison in Rayford. He ate 3 cheeseburgers, French fries, and bacon as a last meal. Carlton Michael Gary. State, Georgia. Date of execution, March 15, 2018. Carlton Michael Gary was an American serial killer who murdered 3 elderly women in Columbus, Georgia, and 1 in Syracuse, New York, between 1975 and 1978. However, he is suspected of at least 4 more killings. Gary was arrested in December 1978 for an armed robbery and sentenced to 21 years in prison. He escaped custody in 1983 and was caught a year later. Evidence was found linking him to the earlier murders, and he was convicted and sentenced to death in August 1986. He was executed by lethal injection on March 15, 2018. Anthony Allen Shore. State, Texas. Date of execution, January 18, 2018. Anthony Allen Shore was an American serial killer and child molester who was responsible for the murders of 1 woman and 3 girls. He was active from 1986 to 2000 and became known as the tourniquet killer because he used a ligature with either a toothbrush or bamboo stick to tighten or loosen the ligature. The instrument was similar to a garrote or a twitch, a tool used by farmers to control horses. Shore was sentenced to death in 2004 and executed by lethal injection on January 18, 2018. Before the execution, he confessed that, "I made my peace," and his last words were, "Ooey, I can feel that."
And now the scheduled execution of the so-called ice pick killer. That'll happen in less than an hour from now.
Danny Paul Bible. State, Texas. Date of execution, June 27, 2018. Danny Paul Bible, known as the Ice Pick Killer, was an American serial killer, serial rapist, and child sexual abuser who committed 4 murders and numerous sexual assaults between 1979 and 1983. Originally sentenced to 25 years imprisonment for 1 murder and never charged with 2 others, he was paroled early and committed multiple sexual assaults across Montana, Texas, and Louisiana. Following his final arrest, he confessed to a sexual assault murder in 1979 and to the 2 other murders he was never tried for. After failing to appeal his death sentence, Bible was executed in 2018. While he had no final words, reporters from the Houston Chronicle claimed that he had uttered the words "it hurts" and "burning" after being injected, but this has never been officially verified. Ricky Javon Gray. State, Virginia. Date of execution, January 18, 2017. The 2006 Richmond Spree murders took place over 7 days in January 2006 in and around Richmond, Virginia, United States. 7 people, 4 members of the Harvey family and 3 members of the Baskerville Tucker family, were killed. The perpetrators were Ricky Javon Gray and his nephew, Ray Joseph Dandridge. Gray was convicted of capital murder in connection with the Harvey family murders and was sentenced to death for the killings of the Harvey children. Gray's execution was carried out on January 18, 2017 at 9:42 p.m. by lethal injection. Jack Harold Jones, Jr., State, Florida. Date of execution, April 24, 2017. Jack Harold Jones, Jr. was an American serial killer who murdered at least 3 women in Florida and Arkansas between 1983 and 1995. Convicted of 2 murders during his lifetime and executed in 2017, he was posthumously linked via DNA to the 3rd murder, for which another man was imprisoned. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, potato logs with tartar sauce, beef jerky bites, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and fruit punch. Kenneth Dwayne Williams. State, Arkansas. Date of execution, April 27, 2017. Kenneth Dwayne Williams was an American serial killer who killed 4 people in Arkansas and Missouri. Originally sentenced to life without parole in Arkansas for killing a cheerleader in 1998, Williams escaped from prison in a 500-gallon barrel of pig slop in 1999. He then killed another man and stole his truck, driving several miles away from the prison before unintentionally killing another man in a police chase in Missouri. Williams was convicted of the murder he committed shortly after escaping prison and was sentenced to death. In 2005, He confessed to committing another murder in 1998. Williams became the last of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017. Kenneth Williams's last meal consisted of 2 pieces of fried chicken with sweet rice, BBQ pinto beans, a slice of bread, a peanut butter cookie, and a cinnamon roll. Williams read his last words from a written statement held by a prison official. "I humbly extend my sincerest apologies to the families I senselessly wronged and deprived of their loved ones. The families of Dominique Hurd, Gerald Jenkins, Cecil Boren, Michael Greenwood. I was more than wrong. The crimes I perpetrated against you all were senseless, extremely hurtful, and inexcusable. I humbly beg your forgiveness and pray you find the peace, healing, and closure you all deserve. I'm not the person I was. I've been transformed. Some things can't be undone. I seek forgiveness."
That's hard to deal with.
Oscar Ray Bolin, Jr., State, Florida. Date of execution, January 7, 2016. Oscar Ray Bolin, Jr. was an American serial killer and convicted rapist who was executed in Florida for murder. In 1986, Bolin kidnapped and murdered 3 young women in Tampa, Florida. He was later connected to a 4th murder in Texas in 1987. The murders went unsolved for nearly 4 years until the husband of his ex-wife called a tip line and implicated him. He maintained his innocence to the end. His last meal consisted of a ribeye steak, a baked potato, salad, garlic bread, lemon meringue pie, and Coca-Cola. He didn't give a final word. Robert Charles Ladd, State, Texas. Date of execution, January 29, 2015. Robert Charles Ladd was an American serial killer who was convicted and sentenced to death for murdering a woman in Tyler, Texas in 1996 after being paroled for a 1978 triple murder in Dallas. He was executed for the latter crime in 2015, a controversial decision due to his alleged mental disability. His final words to his sister were, "I love you. Let's ride." Alfredo Rolando Prieto, State, Virginia. Date of execution, October 1, 2015. Alfredo Rolando Prieto was a Salvadoran-American serial killer. After being initially convicted for a single murder, he was later connected to 8 other murders committed in Virginia and California between May 1988 and September 1990 via DNA profiling. Sentenced to death in both states, Prieto was executed by lethal injection in Virginia in 2015. Thomas Otis Knight, State, Florida. Date of execution, January 7, 2014. Thomas Otis Knight was an American fugitive who was executed in Florida for murder. In 1974, Knight murdered a Miami couple after forcing them to withdraw $50,000 from a bank. While awaiting trial, Knight and 10 other inmates escaped from jail and went on a crime spree, during which he murdered a store clerk in an armed robbery. He was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list on December 12, 1974, and was captured on December 31, 1974. Knight was sentenced to death in 1975 for the Miami murders. While on death row, he committed a 4th murder, in which he fatally stabbed a corrections officer. After spending 39 years on death row, Knight was executed on January 7, 2014. His last meal consisted of sweet potato pie, coconut cake, banana nut bread, a quarter bottle of Sprite, 2 tablespoons of strawberries, butter pecan ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and Fritos corn chips. He declined to make a final statement. John Ruthel Henry, State, Florida. Date of execution, June 18, 2014. John Ruthel Henry was an American serial killer who was convicted for the 1985 murder of his second wife and stepson in Florida, a few years after being paroled for the 1945 murder of his first wife. After he was sentenced to death in 3 separate trials, Henry was executed for the latter murders at the Florida State Prison in 2014. He refused a last meal, and his final statement was, "I can't undo what I've done. If I could, I would. I ask for your forgiveness if you can find it in your heart. Tommy Lynn Sells. State, Texas. Date of execution, April 3, 2014. Tommy Lynn Sells was an American serial killer, often referred to as the coast-to-coast killer, due to his claims of committing murders across the United States. Though convicted of only one murder, for which he received the death penalty and was eventually executed in 2014, he is believed to have committed at least 22 murders, with Sells himself claiming over 70 victims. Sells's death sentence was carried out at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. When asked if he would like to make a final statement, Sells replied, "No." As a lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered, he took a few deep breaths, closed his eyes, and began to snore. Less than a minute later, he stopped moving. 13 minutes later, at 6:27 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Elroy Chester. State, Texas. Date of execution, June 12, 2013. Elroy Chester was an American serial killer, rapist, and burglar who committed 5 murders in Port Arthur, Texas, between 1997 and 1998. During the 6 months of the killings, Chester was also responsible for a string of home invasions and sexual assaults in the same area. Chester was convicted and sentenced to death for one of the murders and was executed in 2013. He was executed on June 12, 2013 at the Huntsville Unit, Huntsville, Texas, 2 days before his 44th birthday. Chester's final statement was spoken on the gurney. "I just want to say, I don't want you to have hate in your heart for me because I took your loved one. I know it doesn't mean anything. I told the truth because I feel like you should know who killed your loved one. God watches everything. Don't hate me. If you do, you'll have to deal with him later. For me, live your life, but don't hate me. I'm sorry for taking your loved one." To his lawyer, he said, "Thank you for fighting for me in court and for supporting me for all these years. Elroy Chester wasn't a bad man. I knew him. A lot of people say I didn't commit those murders. I did it. That's my statement. Warden, you can go ahead. He didn't request a last meal." John Errol Ferguson, State, Florida. Date of execution, August 5, 2013. The Carroll City murders were a series of murders that took place predominantly in Carroll City, Florida, and in and around Miami-Dade County between October 1974 and January 1978. The murders were committed by American mass murderer and serial killer John Errol Ferguson, who murdered at least 8 people but is believed to have killed up to 12. He was aided in 6 of the murders by 2 accomplices, Marvin Francois and Beaufort James White. On July 27, 1977, Ferguson, Francois, and White entered a substance house in Carroll City where they tied up a total of 8 people and shot all of them in the head execution style. 2 of the 8 survived. Ferguson, Francois, and White were all eventually captured, sentenced to death, and executed by the state of Florida. Ferguson's last meal consisted of shrimp, lobster tail, barbecued spare ribs, chicken breast, watermelon, strawberries, sliced tomatoes, and French fries. He made no last words. Joseph Paul Franklin. State, Missouri. Date of execution, November 20th, 2013. Joseph Paul Franklin was an American serial killer, white supremacist, and domestic terrorist who engaged in a murder spree spanning the late 1970s and early 1980s. Franklin was convicted of several murders and received 7 life sentences, as well as 1 death sentence. Franklin was on Missouri's death row for 15 years, awaiting execution for the 1977 murder of Gerald Gordon. He was executed by lethal injection on November 20th, 2013. Robert Charles Gleason, Jr. State, Virginia. Date of execution, January 16th, 2013. Robert Charles Gleason, Jr. was an American serial killer who was sentenced to death and executed in Virginia for the separate murders of 2 of his cellmates. Gleason, who was already serving a life sentence for another murder, was an execution volunteer who vowed to continue killing in prison if he was not put to death. Capital punishment was abolished in Virginia on March 24, 2021, officially making Gleason the last person to be executed in Virginia by electrocution. He had a last meal that he wanted to keep a secret. His last words were, "Well, I hope Percy ain't going to forget to wet the sponge. Put me on the highway to Jackson and call my Irish buddies. Pog mo thoin. God bless." The phrase Pog mo thoin is translated from Irish as kiss my arse. David Allen Gore, State, Florida, date of execution, April 12, 2012. David Allen Gore.
To where now executed convicted murderer David Allen Gore will be buried. News Channel 5 was there last night.
Was an American serial killer who committed 6 murders in Vero Beach and Indian River County, Florida, from 1981 to 1983. He was accompanied in several of the murders by his cousin, Fred Waterfield, and both have collectively been dubbed the Killing Cousins. Gore was sentenced to death by lethal injection in 2012, having been on Florida's death row for 28 years, while Waterfield is currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences. As Gore lay strapped to a gurney in the death chamber, he said, "I'm sorry, I've had remorse. I'm not the man I was back then. I don't fear death." Robert Wayne Harris. State, Texas. Date of execution, September 20, 2012. Robert Wayne Harris was an American mass murderer and serial killer who killed 6 people in Texas. In 1999, Harris abducted and killed a woman whom he suspected of stealing money from him. The following year, he went on a shooting rampage at his former workplace, a car wash, killing 5 people. Harris had been fired a few days earlier after he exposed himself to a customer. He was convicted of capital murder for the car wash shooting, sentenced to death, and executed in 2012. His last words were, "I want to tell y'all, know that I love you. Billy, I love you. English, Hart, and Eloise. Dwight, take care of Dwight. I'm going home. I'm going home. I'll be all right. Don't worry. I love y'all. God bless the Texas Rangers, Texas Rangers." Manuel Pardo Jr., State, Florida. Date of execution, December 11, 2012. Manuel Manny Pardo Jr. was an American serial killer and former police officer previously employed by the Florida Highway Patrol and the Sweetwater Police Department. Between January and April 1986, he killed 9 known victims. He was convicted on 9 counts of first-degree murder, for which he was sentenced to death. He was executed in December 2012. Oba Chandler, State, Florida. Date of execution, November 15, 2011. Oba Chandler.
Just before 4:30 this afternoon, the state of Florida executed convicted killer Oba Chandler.
Was an American serial killer and mass murderer who was convicted and executed for the June 1989 murders of Joan Rogers and her 2 daughters. Their bodies were found floating in Tampa Bay, Florida, with their hands and feet bound. On November 15th at 4:08 p.m., Chandler was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. Chandler declined to make a last statement before being executed, but left a written statement with prison officials. He wrote, "You are killing a, SIC, innocent man today." Frank Spisak, Jr., State, Ohio, date of execution, February 17, 2011. Frank Spisak, Jr. was an American serial killer who was convicted of 3 murders and 1 attempted murder at Cleveland State University. In February 1982, Spisak embarked on a racist, anti-Semitic shooting spree, calling it his first seek and destroy mission, in which he was attempting to clean up the city. During his murder trial, he grew a Hitler mustache and carried a copy of Mein Kampf. On February 17, 2011, Spisak was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility near Lucasville, Ohio, at the age of 59. He was the longest-serving death row inmate in the state of Ohio. Spesak's last meal consisted of spaghetti with tomato sauce, a salad, chocolate cake, and coffee. Thomas Warren Weisenhant. State, Alabama. Date of execution, May 27, 2010. Thomas Warren Weisenhant was an American serial killer who murdered at least 4 women between 1963 and 1976 in Mobile County, Alabama. After being arrested for the October 1976 murder of Cheryl Payton, Weisenhant confessed to killing 3 other women. He was sentenced to death in Alabama in September 1977 and was executed in May 2010 at Holman Correctional Facility via lethal injection. At the time of his execution, Weisenhant was Alabama's longest-serving death row inmate, having spent 32 years, 8 months, and 20 days on death row. His last meal consisted of chicken leg quarters, French fries, American cheese, an orange drink, coffee, and chocolate pudding. He declined to make a final statement. Franklin Dwayne Alex, State, Texas. Date of execution, March 30th, 2010. Franklin Dwayne.
I can actually just be sitting there, maybe typing a letter and feel.
This was an American rapist, robber, kidnapper, and serial killer who committed at least 3 murders, 2 attempted murders, 9 robberies, 2 sexual assault, and 4 kidnappings during a crime spree in the late 1990s. Most of his crimes occurred at apartment complexes in Houston, Texas. Alex was sentenced to death for one of the murders and executed in 2010. When asked if he preferred a last meal, he declined. Alex's last words were, "I am not the monster they made me out to be. I made lots of mistakes that took your son. I messed up, made poor choices. I'll take it to the grave. I will be at peace. It is what it is. I got peace in my heart." John Allen Muhammad, State, Virginia. Date of execution, November 10, 2009. John Allen Muhammad was an American serial killer who, along with his partner and accomplice, Lee Boyd Malvo, carried out the D.C. sniper attacks of October 2002, killing 17 people. Muhammad and Malvo were arrested in connection with the attacks on October 24, 2002, following tips from alert citizens. Muhammad was executed by lethal injection on November 10, 2009, at 9:06 p.m. at the Greensville Correctional Center near Girard, Virginia. He was pronounced dead at 9:11 p.m. He had previously declined to make a final statement. Muhammad's last meal consisted of chicken, red sauce, and cake. Reginald Perkins, State, Texas. Date of execution, January 22, 2009. Reginald Perkins was an American serial killer and sex offender who was executed in Texas for the December 2000 murder of his stepmother. He was also linked with DNA to the murders of 2 women in Fort Worth in 1991, and he is suspected of killing 3 women in Ohio in the early 1980s. On January 22, 2009, Perkins was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m. About an hour before his execution, he called a prison official to his cell and gave him a statement in which he proclaimed his innocence. John Joseph Fortenberry, State, Ohio. Date of execution, July 14, 2009. John Joseph Fortenberry was an American serial killer. A long-haul trucker, Fortenberry befriended and subsequently murdered 5 people across 4 states between 1990 and 1991. After his arrest, he confessed to an additional 1984 murders for which another man was convicted. He was sentenced to death for one of his killings and subsequently executed at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in 2009. There was no record of his last meal and final words. Terry Lee Hankins, State, Texas. Date of execution, June 2, 2009. Terry Lee Hankins was an American serial killer who killed 5 family members in Mansfield, Texas, between October 2000 and August 2001. After fully admitting responsibility, he was convicted of 2 of the murders and was sentenced to death. Hankins was executed by lethal injection on June 2, 2009. His last words were, "I am sorry for what I've done and for all the pain and suffering my actions have caused. Jesus is Lord, all glory to God." Leon David Dorsey IV. State, Texas. Date of execution, August 12, 2008. Leon David Dorsey IV, also known as Pistol Pete, was an American serial killer who shot and killed 2 Blockbuster store employees and a Korean store clerk in Texas over several months in 1994. He confessed and was later given a death sentence. He was executed at the Huntsville unit on August 12, 2008. Before death, Dorsey turned his head to the spectator room and said, "I love all y'all. I forgive all y'all. See y'all when you get there." There was no record of his last meal. Alvin Andrew Kelly. State, Texas. Date of execution, October 14, 2008. Alvin Andrew Kelly was an East Texas man who committed 4 drug-related murders in Longview and Lake Cherokee, Texas, from May to June 1984, killing 2 reserve marshals, their infant son, and later his roommate. Convicted and sentenced to death for the infant's murder, he was executed in 2008. On the day of his execution, Kelly made a lengthy final statement in which he claimed that he had embraced Christianity and wanted to apologize to the family members of both the Morgans and Ford, admitting his crimes. Danny Harold Rolling, State, Florida. Date of execution, October 25, 2006. Danny Harold Rolling, known as the Gainesville Ripper, was an American serial killer who murdered 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida, over 4 days in August 1990. He later confessed to raping several of his victims, committing a triple homicide in his home city of Shreveport, Louisiana, and attempting to murder his father in May 1990. In total, Rolling confessed to killing 8 people. He was sentenced to death for the 5 Gainesville murders in 1994 and executed by lethal injection in 2004. His killing spree inspired the slasher film franchise Scream. Rolling had a last meal of lobster tail. He sang a gospel hymn but made no statement before his execution, which was witnessed by many of his victims' relatives. Earl Richmond Jr., State, North Carolina. Date of execution, May 6, 2005. Earl Richmond Jr. was an American serial killer who committed 4 murders, including those of 2 children in New Jersey and North Carolina between April and November 1991. Before the murders, Richmond served in the United States Army as a drill sergeant at Fort Dix in New Jersey, where he committed multiple sexual assaults. Following his arrest for murder, he was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in 2005. Richmond's last words were, "I'd like to extend my deepest apologies to all the victims' families and their loved ones. I'd like to say that I'm not a man that shies away from his responsibilities. I'd like to say that I hope that now, through my death, that y'all can move forward with your lives. Thank you and God bless you." He didn't accept the last meal. Donald J. Beardsley. State, Missouri. Date of execution, January 19, 2005. Donald J. Beardsley was an American serial killer who murdered 3 women. While on parole for killing a woman in Missouri in 1969, Beardsley murdered 2 more women in California. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in San Quentin State Prison in 2005. Beardsley had no final words nor meal. Michael Bruce Ross. State, Connecticut. Date of execution, May 13, 2005. Michael Bruce Ross was an American serial killer who committed at least 8 murders and was nicknamed the Roadside Strangler. He was executed by the state of Connecticut in 2005. He was the last person executed in Connecticut before the state ended capital punishment, as the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled capital punishment unconstitutional in 2015, converting the sentences of the state's remaining death row inmates to life in prison without parole. Ross did not request a special last meal before his execution, so he ate the regular prison meal of the day. Turkey a la king with rice, mixed vegetables, white bread, fruit, and a beverage. When asked if he would like to make a last statement, he said without opening his eyes, "No, thank you." Edward Louis Legrone. State, Texas. Date of execution, February 11, 2004. Edward Louis Legrone was an American serial killer and rapist. He was convicted of fatally shooting 3 members of the Lloyd family in Fort Worth, Texas, in May 1991, including a 10-year-old girl he had impregnated, approximately 7 years after being released from prison for a previous murder. Legrone was subsequently convicted, sentenced to death, and executed for the latter crimes in 2004. His last words were, "I just want to say I'm not sad today. I'm not bitter with anyone. As I've said from day one, I didn't go in there and kill them, but I'm no better than the people that did. Jesus is Lord." William Dean Wickline, Jr., State, Ohio. Date of execution, March 30, 2004. William Dean Wickline, Jr., known as the Butcher, was an American career criminal and serial killer linked to at least 3 violent murders committed in West Virginia and Ohio from 1979 to 1982. Convicted of killing the latter victims, whose bodies were never found, Wickline was sentenced to death and subsequently executed in 2004. Wickline was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility on March 30, 2004. His final meal consisted of an 8-ounce medium-rare filet mignon, old-fashioned potato salad, 6 buttered rolls, fresh strawberries, shortcake, and butter pecan ice cream. His last words were, "May tomorrow see the courts shaped by more wisdom and less politics." John Michael Hooker. State, Oklahoma. Date of execution, March 25, 2003. John Michael Hooker was an American serial killer who killed his girlfriend and her mother in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in 1988, after having served time for a manslaughter conviction as a teenager. For the latter crimes, Hooker was convicted, sentenced to death, and executed in 2003. His final words were, "Y'all stay up. I'm out." Robert Wesley Knighton. State, Missouri. Date of execution, May 27, 2003. Robert Wesley Knighton was an American serial killer and spree killer who, after serving time for kidnapping and manslaughter in Missouri, embarked on a 4-day, 2-state killing spree along with Lawrence Lingle Britton and Ruth Renee Williams. Britton and Williams both pleaded guilty and testified against Knighton in exchange for leniency and have since been released from prison. Knighton was convicted of 2 murders in Oklahoma and executed in 2003. His last meal consisted of a large pepperoni pizza, a strawberry milkshake, a large order of onion rings, and a banana cream pie. In his barely audible final statement, Knighton thanked his attorneys and apologized. He then spoke to Sue Norton, saying, "I'll see you again someday. God bless you." Juan Rodriguez Chavez, State, Texas. Date of execution, April 22, 2003. Juan Rodriguez Chavez, known as the Thrill Killer, was an American serial killer and spree killer who, together with a teenage accomplice, killed 11 people in Dallas, Texas, during a crime spree lasting from March to July 1995, shortly after being paroled from prison for a murder conviction. For the latter crimes, Chavez was sentenced to death and subsequently executed in 2003. Chavez made a final statement seemingly expressing remorse for his actions. "To the media, I would like for you to tell all the victims and their loved ones that I am truly, truly sorry for taking their loved ones' lives. And I hope they will find it in their heart to forgive me for what I did to them. I am a different person now, but that does not change the fact of the bad things I have committed. God can give you the same peace He gave me, and you can be in His hands. And to my beautiful family, be strong. Remember what I said, God is the way, the truth, and the life." Okay, Warden. He had no record of a last meal. Aileen Carol Warnos. State, Florida. Date of execution, October 9, 2002. Eileen Carol Wuornos was an American serial killer. In 1989 to 1990, while engaging in street prostitution along highways in Florida, she shot dead and robbed 7 of her male clients. Wuornos claimed that her clients had either raped or attempted to rape her and that the homicides of the men were committed in self-defense. She was sentenced to death for 6 of the murders. She was executed on October 9, 2002, by lethal injection after spending more than 10 years on Florida's death row.
She's seeking out victims, she's getting access to them, she has an opportunity to harm them.
She declined her last meal and opted for a cup of coffee instead. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus." June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back. She died at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Stephen Wayne Anderson. State, California. Date of execution, January 29, 2002. Stephen Wayne Anderson was an American contract killer and serial killer who was executed at California's San Quentin State Prison by lethal injection in 2002 for the murder of Elizabeth Lyman. He was known to have killed or admitted to the killings of at least 8 other people, including a fellow inmate, and at least 7 contract killings.
"These are the executed ones," he stated. Eyes small sparks, and then was gone, dissolving into the umbra arts of night.
Anderson's last meal consisted of 2 grilled cheese sandwiches with radishes, 1 pint of cottage cheese, a hominy jekchonk corn mixture, 1 peach pie slice, and 1 chocolate chip ice cream. He had no last words. Alton Coleman, State, Ohio. Date of execution, April 26, 2002. Alton Coleman was an American serial killer who, along with accomplice Deborah Brown, committed a crime spree across 6 states between May and July 1984 that resulted in the deaths of 8 people. Coleman, who received death sentences in 3 states, was executed by the state of Ohio in 2002. Brown was sentenced to death in Ohio and Indiana, but the sentences were later reduced to life imprisonment without parole and 140 years respectively. For his last meal, Coleman ordered a well-done filet mignon smothered with mushrooms, fried chicken breasts, a salad with French dressing, sweet potato pie topped with whipped cream, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, broccoli with melted cheese, biscuits and gravy, and cherry Coke. Before his execution, he released a letter apologizing for his actions. Burt Laurie Hunter. State, Missouri. Date of execution, June 28, 2000. Burt Leroy Hunter was an American serial killer. He is best known for committing the double murder of an elderly woman and her son in Jefferson City, Missouri in 1988, together with accomplice Thomas Grant Irvin. Both Hunter and Irvin were sentenced to death for their respective roles in the murders, despite Irvin maintaining his innocence. Hunter was executed in 2000, while Irvin was executed in 2001. His final words were reportedly, "There is no justice. It's time for this nightmare to be over as far as I'm concerned." Daniel Joe Hiddle. State, Texas. Date of execution, December 6, 2000. Daniel Joe Hiddle was an American serial killer, spree killer, and mass murderer who shot and killed 5 people, including a police officer, during a rampage in Dallas and Garland, Texas in 1989. At the time, he was on parole for the 1973 murders of his adoptive parents in Motley, Minnesota. For his latter crimes, Hiddle was sentenced to death and subsequently executed in 2000. His last statement was "Sant Ajaib Singh, that's it," referencing the Indian guru Ajaib Singh. Darrell Keith Rich. State, California. Date of execution, March 15, 2000. Darrell Keith Rich, known as the Hilltop Rapist, was an American serial killer who murdered 3 women and an 11-year-old girl in Redding, California, between June and August 1978. He was sentenced to death in California in 1981 for 2 of the murders and was executed in 2000 at San Quentin State Prison by lethal injection. Rich declined a last meal and only drank tea, broth, and Gatorade. His final hours were spent with his spiritual advisors and his attorneys. His final statement was just the word peace. Edward Castro. State: Florida. Date of execution: December 7, 2000. Edward Castro was an American serial killer. An unemployed drifter from California, Castro fatally stabbed 3 men across Florida between 1986 and 1987. Tried for 2 of the murders, he was given a life sentence for one of them and sentenced to death for the other. He waived all of his appeals and dropped his defense team to advocate for his execution. Castro was executed at Florida State Prison by lethal injection in the year 2000. Castro ate his final meal of steak, shrimp, ice cream, and cola. Afterwards, he was led to the execution room, where he was strapped to a bed and given the lethal injection. If you like the way we create these videos and you want us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives.